Oh, many questions for once. We start here in front and then we go to the back, please.
Catherine Fior, EU reporter. Just a question on conflict minerals. President Donald Trump signed an executive order that will allow US firms to sell conflict minerals. Would you like to see the EU in its relations with the US to take up this issue and ask them to take similar measures to the European Union? Thank you.
Well, the US were actually partly a bit further than us with the Dodd-Franks Act, which is certainly not perfect, but it has been the first step ahead in that. Now, there has been reports that Trump might want to get rid of that, and that is very worrying because in that specific measure, the US were a pioneer, where we could also learn a lot from things that didn't work so perfectly.
So next question here.
Hi, thanks. Alex Pigman from Agence France-Presse. I just had a question about the EU-Turkey deal. Last week, it's a factual question I'm hoping you can help us with. Last week, the ECJ said that the EU-Turkey deal isn't an EU deal, which sort of makes me wonder why we had a summit, why the Commission works on these things, where the money's coming from. This thing doesn't exist, according to the ECJ, and they said move on guichet number 7 instead of guichet number 5. So what is the fallout of the EU-Turkey deal not being an EU deal?
It's even more complicated. It's neither a deal.
No.
So it's not an EU, Turkey, and it's not a deal. It's not an EU deal because it was signed by the member states, the heads of state and government of the member states, and their Turkish counterpart back then was Davutoglu. And it's not a deal because there is no agreement. It's not an international agreement. Tells like the judicial service from the parliament who tells us this. They basically said, well, it's a press release. But on the basis of a press release, people are being returned to Turkey. This is like the paper they get when they're being returned. At least it was like this in the beginning. Is the Turkey deal, which is nothing but a press release, according to the judicial services. I think this is unbelievable. And if it was supposed to be an international agreement, also it would have to go via Parliament. We anyway see the tendency that the Parliament is more and more excluded. It was the case in the Turkey deal, where we're told we're not having a role, it's not a deal, it's not EU. Same goes for things like the No Way Forward deal with Afghanistan, which is de facto a readmission agreement. But for a readmission agreement, the Parliament would have to say yes. Yeah. But they did it without ever going through the Parliament. And this is another really crazy thing, that the member states, with the help of the Commission and with their facilitation, are completely ignoring the European Parliament and also the national parliaments, of course, by doing their shady deals with someone like Erdogan, where it's very clearly that having such a deal gives Erdogan possibilities for blackmailing, and we've seen it in the whole human rights debate that no member state dares to criticize Erdogan sufficiently, with exceptions maybe now, because of the Turkey deal, because of the refugee deal, because they're afraid that Erdogan will send refugees.
If I may, in the COP last week, precisely because of the ECJ arrest, what I said, well, this Parliament should discuss this, because actually the form that they've taken for this makes it impossible for Parliament to do its job, as Kat was saying. And you know what? The vast majority of the presidents of the group said, no, we shouldn't discuss this. So it's not, without the Parliament knowing, the Parliament happily, the majority of this Parliament happily concedes that we should have no role, and that this kind of deal should be the kind of deal of the future. So that's the reality. And the whole right wing, including, I must say, the liberals of Mr. Verhofstadt, were all too happy to say, no, that's not the topic worth discussing here.
Thank you. Now we go to the back, please.
Une question pour que j'info.
Perhaps we go first here, because that will be for sure also in Turkey. And then
Monsieur Mali de la presse.
I'm from the Kurdish press. And for the last week, the UN, based in Geneva, as well as the Venice Commission and the Monitoring Committee of the Council of Europe, have been sounding the alarm bell. They have been saying something serious is going on in Turkey, and they are unable, apparently, to go there to investigate the situation in the light of the European Union's declarations. This is a matter of form more than anything else. This dialogue between Merkel, Germany and Erdogan. Do you think this is an issue of form, or is it a substantive issue? And if so, what should the European Union, European Parliament do about what is going on in Turkey? Thank you.
Well, we've also read the Venice Commission report, and indeed that makes us deeply worried. I think, I would share the conclusions of that report, and namely that we're moving towards a authoritarian rule in Turkey if the referendum passes, which is not sure. I mean, the polls show it's very tight. I think that's also explaining why Erdogan is so absolutely nervous and is looking for an escalation elsewhere. But we're very deeply worried about the situation in Turkey, and I think the EU and the member states have to speak with one voice defending democracy and human rights, and I think they have also possibilities for that. One is not to make themselves dependent via the Turkey deal, the refugee deal. And the second one is the enlargement of the customs union, which is starting to be negotiated. This is something Erdogan really, really wants because it helps the Turkish economy, which is not doing so well. This is where we would have a huge leverage. And I think we as the EU should say, okay, we're not looking into the enlargement of the customs union right now, as long as the situation is so bad. That would be a strong message. That would really be something that would hurt Erdogan deeply. Unfortunately, all the member states seem to be ready to go ahead. The Commission is going ahead. The Parliament will vote on its position in the coming weeks. So I'm worried that this idea of supporting human rights and democracy may be not so, trickling down to all policy areas, at least not when it comes to doing business, unfortunately.
Thank you. So now the other question.
Une question pour QH Info.
I've got a question. I'm from the Strasbourg media on Jean-Claude Juncker's white paper. Are there any of those scenarios that you would give precedence to, and if not, why not? Do you share the fear of some Eastern European countries of being sidelined? Well, let me tell you what I think. Basically and broadly speaking, the issues that have been raised by Jean-Claude Juncker are correct. I mean, should we be going more quickly? Should we be slowing down? And should we all be moving ahead, or just some of us forging ahead? But the question he hasn't asked is, in order to do what? I mean, take scenario 5, so federalist integration. Now, the first thing would be to have more and more free trade treaties. Now, I don't know if you've observed public opinion in certain countries, public opinion towards Europe and free trading Europe. Well, I think public opinion has shifted against that conception of Europe. So the question isn't so much whether you should be moving more quickly, more slowly, altogether, or just a few forging ahead. What the Greens would say is that we need more Europe in some areas, so in tax affairs, for example, in social affairs, migration, immigration, energy, for example. If we really do want to have influence, if we do want to have sovereignty, then I think that we do need to join forces and work together. So our argument would be that we need to act as a matter of urgency, because if we don't have a fiscal and social union, then the union will collapse. So we need a fiscal and a social union, and our response would be that if 28 don't want to go ahead together, then you need a coalition of the willing, if you like. So you would need enhanced cooperation. And I have to say, I am astonished the amount of people who seem to be waking up to the idea that there is such a thing as enhanced cooperation. I mean, you can think what you like about a multi-speed Europe, but really that is enhanced cooperation. And then you've got people saying, well, yes, actually, that is what it amounts to. So first of all, we would say that you should try things 28 working together, but you would have to have the system of enhanced cooperation remaining open to anyone, a coalition of the willing. So we do not want the slowest to dictate the terms to all the rest. And what our Polish colleagues seem to be saying is as follows. You can't say that you want to slow things down and you want the European to disintegrate as far as possible, and then at the same time say that you don't want a multi-speed Europe. So, I mean, you've got to come down on one side or the other at some point in time, and Poland has got to decide what it wants, and it will be welcome if it wants to join us, but it can't throw a spanner in the works. It can't prevent countries which share a currency, for example, from doing more things together. It's not a matter of trying to set up private clubs. Rather, as I say, it's coalitions of the willing. I mean, Schengen, Euro are all coalitions of the willing. You know, variable geometry applies to these various coalitions. Our preference would be for a Europe of 28.
More questions. Sebastian, and then over there.
Thank you, Sebastian Schobel, German Public Radio. I would just like to get your insight into the Dutch election that's coming up. Hi, sorry, view is blocked. What is your assessment of the situation so far? I've seen the Green candidate is doing quite well, but there's always the fear that Mr. Wilders will run away with this election and change the landscape in Holland. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to answer in Dutch actually, but no, of course, we have again an insurgent national populist party, and it's been around for a while. Like the FPÖ has been around for a while in Austria, and while the FPÖ failed facing Van der Bellen a few months ago, I'm happy that here you have Greens who are seen as a worthy alternative. If you both reject ordinary orthodox policy making and you reject national populism, well, the Greens may be a credible alternative. And Jesse Klaver has managed to, and he's a very different person from Van der Bellen, yet he shares with Van der Bellen the solidity and the calmness of the beliefs and what we propose. Because interestingly, we'll see whether the success materializes, because of course we have big hopes. Of course we are going to multiply our number of MPs. By how much remains to be seen, but it is not by being soft. I mean, Klaver is not soft in what he proposes. Social justice is at the heart of it, or social injustice, inclusiveness, multicultural society, openness. So he dares taking the exact opposite standpoint of Wilders. And it seems to be successful. We'll see what comes out of that, but indeed we may see an example of reshaping of the political landscape in the Netherlands. So there's worrying parts to this reshaping, but there's also hopeful parts in this reshaping. And I'm glad that the Greens are part of that hopeful part of the reshaping of European politics. Yes, there is hope. Yes, there are alternatives that do not preach barricading yourself behind thick walls to insulate you from the challenges of this century. I think that the national populists are selling bullshit to people because none of their solutions can ever work, but they are riding on a wave of anger and fear, which is there. But the question is always, what do you do with your anger? Do you make it destructive, or do you want to build something with it?
Last question, please.
Tony Glamchevsky, Radio Télévision Macédonienne. Vous avez parlé du
Macedonian television, you talked about the Brussels summit, at which the European perspectives for the Balkan countries were reaffirmed. Now, it has been the situation for the last 20 years. Situation in the Balkans more explosive than it has been for many years right now. And what about the situation in Macedonia and the ongoing political crisis?
Yeah, indeed, we're also looking with great concern at the Balkans, which is a very important part of Europe, though not yet of the European Union, but we have always been supporting the idea of getting the Balkan countries also closer to the European Union and towards the European Union. And, well, we should, I think, always have a close look. Also ourselves, I mean, there's things we can do ourselves without always looking at the Commission, like being in close contact and touch with the civil society organizations there, because those are the people who are building the country. And we have seen also in the past years in different countries very hopeful movements, you know, people standing up for citizens' rights, for civil liberties, for solidarity and things. So these are things we can build on, and it would be disastrous if things could be destroyed in different countries by corruption, by political leaders who don't want to leave, who don't see their time is over, that would be disastrous. So I think it takes a lot of political responsibility by the people in power, and it takes us to also, basically all of us, to build contacts with the civil society to make sure that we keep a very close connection to the Balkans.